Warren Buffett, he's a famous investor. And one thing that he's famous for saying is that price is what you pay, but value is what you get. And with therapy, is very similar. There's a price that you do pay, but the value that you get is so much more than the price that you pay. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the podcast featuring your host, Philip Wells. And "the" is an acronym that stands for Therapy Helps Everyone. Now, it's been a few months since I've done a podcast, and as you guys may know, with COVID and everything, things have really been up in the air. And as a result, I've just been taking time to really just focus on myself and try to make sure that, I'm taking care of my mental health, physical health as well, and so on and so forth. But also, and more importantly, and this is kind of a good thing, business has really been booming since COVID has hit. I've had a lot of people come to my office just to talk about, their anxieties about whether it's catching the virus or talking about the anxieties that have been created due to the virus, such as job losses and the transition from living, or the transition from working to now working at home. So, and a lot of people have been, constantly around their spouses, or they haven't really been able to get out to indulge in those self-care activities such as going to the beach, the park, to their favorite movies, or even really just to go and see, or really just to go visit, family, or take those vacations that we typically take. So, in other words, things have really been busy for me, which is a good thing in a sense. But obviously, I take that with a grain of salt. But I'm back and I'm ready to give you guys another episode. So, the goal for today's episode is for me to talk about my first therapy session and what that was like. And the whole purpose of this episode really is to help those last few people who are truly on the fence about going to therapy and what it's all about. My goal is to make sure that everyone knows that, therapy is something that can be beneficial to their lives. Once you improve on your mental health, so many different facets of your life will start to flourish, such as your careers, your relationships, um, your overall self being, your ability to cope with things that come your way. A lot of people, they may have what is called adjustment disorders, basically meaning that when something comes about their way, when life throws you a curveball, for some of us, we can adjust to these differences, such as COVID, a lot easier than others. And for those who do not have the proper coping skills, when these adjustments do come about, they may experience anxiety or depression. So, in other words, mental health, therapy, whatever you want to call it, is really a great way to kind of boost your skill set, boost your mental fitness, as some may call it, in order to handle those tough and trying times. But again, the goal of this episode is really to help those last few people who are on the fence, because by now I want to say that everyone should at least been hearing about mental health and how it can be beneficial to their lives. Lately, a lot of activists, actors, athletes, but also even just in the commercials that we see, you're starting to see this huge push for mental health. So I just want to make one last push to kind of get those people who are on the fence across the line. So with that being said, the first time that I ever been to therapy actually happened in college. A lot of people may not know this. I honestly didn't know this, but a lot of schools, they have this thing called CAPS, and CAPS is a place where you can go and get therapy services from many times a lot of the students that are in mental health programs. It kind of serves as their internship. And these students may be in their master level programs, or they may be graduate level students, or I'm sorry, PhD students. So what it is very similar to you going to the doctor that's on campus for your school. This is already included in your bill, so it's completely free. So a lot of students, they they truly have a great opportunity to go to therapy for free and just simply experience what that feeling, what that experience is truly like. A lot of people nowadays, they may get caught up in the stigma that therapy is expensive or is more so of a luxury versus a preventative measure, which is what me and so many other therapists we try to push. We try to let people know that therapy is not just for one certain type of population, right? Therapy is for any and everyone. So for me, I went to therapy on campus, and this was back at my time in my graduate program back at Clemson University in South Carolina. And the thing that kind of let me know that I needed to go to therapy was how my anxieties was affecting me in different areas of my life. And this is a good indicator for us as therapists, but it also should be a good indicator for anyone who's not a therapist themselves that hey, I should be thinking about going to therapy. So when you have an issue, a problem, a concern, whatever it is, that's affecting your social life, your career, your relationships, but also really and truly just your emotional well-being. If it's affecting a different um or if it's affecting different areas of your lives such as that, that is an indicator that you should be going to that you should think about going to therapy. And even more specifically, if it's going on for longer than 6 months. So a lot of disorders that we may see in the DSM, which is the Bible for therapists and psychiatrists, to let them know like, hey, this person may be suffering from schizophrenia, bipolar, anxiety, depression, whatever you call it. This is one of the things that we look for as a indicator. How long has this person been going through this brief period in their lives? So for me, when I started having this anxiety, I was actually having anxiety about my health, which is very similar to what's going on right now with COVID. A lot of times, and you people listening to this, you may have experienced this, but you may, let's say, have a rash or a headache or something like that, and then you may Google the symptoms, and then it may say, oh, this is maybe a symptom of brain cancer, or this may be a symptom of skin cancer, or whatever it is. All these things start to come up, or maybe it's a disease that you've just never heard of, and then you start to dive a little deeper into what this disease is all about and what some of the implications. And then you find out, wow, I only have 3 months to live. And it's like, man, like this could really happen. And like your mind starts to develop all these alternative stories or all these things that, could possibly happen. And it really takes you truly down a rabbit hole. And I think a lot of people right now may be experiencing this as well with COVID. If you ever watching the news and you seeing the death tolls add up, or you see the cases starting to add up, right now it's really really high in my area down in Miami. We're now what they're saying is the new epicenter of this disease. This stuff starts to build anxiety, right? Especially for those who may also have those pre-existing conditions, or maybe also a part of the older population. These people may especially be falling victim to some of those anxieties that I mentioned earlier. So for me, what I started to notice with me in particular, I started to notice that my mind starts to wander, and it was tough for me to be present, whether it was in a classroom or even within simple conversations I may have with friends at a restaurant or a bar or whatever the case it may be. I will find my mind just wandering, and then I'll start to sweat. I start to get these sweats and start to get this headache. And this headache was a unique headache, and it's unique to a lot of times depression, where it feels like you have a headband, or the headache is almost like a headband in terms of where you feel it around your head. I started to having these, and I started to have muscle aches and shortness of breath, and also it even just started to break out in like these rashes or these hives. Like all these things were happening, and what I was doing, I was googling like, hey, what are these symptoms of? And as a result of me googling these things like cancer were starting to come up, or again, some disease that I've never heard of would start to come up, and that right there would further increase the anxieties that I had. So one of the tall tall tales or signs that, hey, I really need to go and see a therapist was, when I started to get poorer grades in my classes. And typically I'm really a good student. I typically get A's or B's in a lot of my classes. So when I started to see that I was getting C's on assignments, that was an indicator that, hey, I need to go and well, first I need to go and see like what's wrong, see if I can maybe get a cure or whatever it was, some medicine for whatever this disease that I thought I was having. So now that I could focus in class. But every time I would go to a doctor, they would say, "Hey, like you're fine. There's nothing wrong. We can't find anything. But if something does come up, come back to the office, and we'll see what we can do, and we can run some tests." So I said, "Okay." So I would go home, start studying or whatever, and then the thought of me having some type of sickness again will start to produce these same symptoms. Again, the headaches, the muscle aches, or even the rashes, as I mentioned earlier. So for me, this will start to send me back down that same rabbit hole. And as a result, I will find myself back in the doctor's office. And I was doing it so many times that I really started to rack up these really high bills, from whether it's going to the office or going to an ER or whatever the case it may be, and it was really taking its toll on me. And one of the doctors, they actually suggested like, hey, have you ever thought about going to therapy? Hey, Coach Wells here. Sorry to interrupt the podcast, but if you like what you're hearing and you're finding value in this podcast, go ahead and follow it so that way you can get more information about new episodes. All right, back to the show. And seeing if maybe this is symptoms of maybe anxiety. And I didn't think about it at first when he said it. It really didn't cross my mind. And ironically, I was in a counselor education program, so you would assume that I would know what the symptoms of anxiety would look like, but I was just so blinded by by the thoughts of me being sick that I really couldn't notice it. So I said, okay, let me go check it out. So what I did was I googled and I researched and I came across the CAP Center, which is offered at the university, which is again offered at so many different universities. So I found it. I went and checked it out, and I remember when I first got there were so many different forms that I had to fill out. Whether it's have I ever had suicidal thoughts, or if I was taking any medications, or if I've ever seen a psychiatrist, or if I ever been to therapy in general. And after I answered all these questions, I found myself sitting in the waiting room. Actually, it's funny. I was actually in the waiting room, and I was a little bit nervous. I was a little bit shy, a little bit, you know, maybe even to a small degree, like ashamed, right? Uh, because I didn't want people to think that I was, crazy or anything like that. And it's funny, because a lot of people would say that that is the main reason why they don't want to go to therapy, right? But for me, I challenged those thoughts. I told myself, hey, this is something that I truly need to do in order to get past this little bump in the road. So when they called my name, I went back and I met the therapist. I remember, as soon as I walked in, feeling this sense of relief without, there being anything said. Nothing was said. And all of a sudden, I felt this sense of relief. And the reason why I felt that way is because when I got back there, I realized that, hey, this is a place where I can truly be myself and take my mask off. So many of us, we walk around and we have to be this certain type of person that, whether it's society, our friends, um, our loved ones, they need us to be. They need us to be this strong person. They need us to be this person that's able to give good advice, or whatever the case it may be. But when I got back there, it just felt so good to kind of just sit in a chair and just take a load off and truly let someone in with these thoughts that I was having, and not be judged for it. So, the session, it honestly was very, very simple. It was basic. It was, there was nothing that they asked that truly made me uncomfortable. It was really just two people talking. And, at the end of the session, they were able to give me some really great tips. And many of these tips are things that I tell my clients. But it's something about being able to hear from someone that's objective or has an objective standpoint. Someone that can sit there and tell you, hey, like, when these thoughts do come about, I want you to practice what's called thought stopping. So trying to literally stop the thought in its tracks and then focus on something else, right? And it sounds so simple, but it's truly a great tool, and it's a tool that I sometimes suggest to a lot of my clients. Like the idea of literally trying to stop the thought and being very intentional with where you place your mind next, right? Another thing that they suggested was, simply using imagery, right? So imagery is a form of mindfulness. So they would ask for me to think about, one of my favorite places to visit, and for me that was, oddly enough, it was Rock Hill, South Carolina, and the reason why is because that's where I did my undergraduate at, and I have so many great memories there. So they would ask me to go and think about, maybe a favorite time that I had in Rock Hill, South Carolina. What is it that I'm doing? What is it that I'm seeing? What is it that I'm smelling or hearing? Right? All these things were intentional for me to kind of focus my senses on something else in order to get me out of that mind state of thinking about, hey, am I sick? Right? So, it was these things and a combination of other things that kind of helped slowly take me out of those negative thoughts, those intrusive thoughts. And then after a while, I found myself slowly being able to what we call challenge those thoughts, right? And that's something that I really, really love doing with my clients. I always ask them like, "Hey, how can we challenge these thoughts?" And the way that we do that is we do things such as asking if we have evidence that these thoughts are true. Because a lot of times what happens is that we tend to, jump to conclusion, or we tend to magnify things, or we may have what's called dichotomous thinking. So the idea that, there are only two options, so either left or right, up or down, black or white, or really and truly just all or nothing thinking. And all these unhealthy thoughts that I were having or I fell victim to, it was easier for me to combat those and to try to replace them with new and more positive thoughts. So, one thing that I challenge my clients and that the therapist asked me to do is that for every negative thought that I have, try to replace those thoughts with three positive thoughts and simply meditate on those thoughts. And that right there in itself would totally change my entire mood, because the way CBT works, and if you're a therapist, I'm sure you've heard this, your thoughts, they end up controlling your emotions, and then your emotions that ultimately start to control your behaviors, right? And it's this reciprocal effect. So someone that's having the thoughts of, let's say, I'm sick, right? Or such as I have COVID, these thoughts will lead to feelings of fear or anxiety, right? And then once you start to have these feelings, it starts to lead to, having these behaviors. So the behaviors is what your body is physically doing. So this is where you may find yourself having those sweats, right? Or maybe you find yourself having these headaches, stomach aches, or whatever it is. And what's actually ironic is that those those behaviors or those symptoms of anxiety sometimes over or cross over with some symptoms of COVID. So having shortness of breath, right, is a sign of COVID, right? But also it could be seen as a sign of anxiety as well, right? Also, when you have anxiety or when you have depression, what happens is that your immune system, it goes into this almost what I call like this battery saver mode, which is where, your body starts to kind of, like your immune system isn't as strong as it typically would be if you were in a calm state, positive mind, or so on and so forth. So you may actually find yourself getting sicker a little bit easier if you have anxiety, right? Same as when you have COVID. When you have COVID, you produce these flu like symptoms, right? So again, the headaches, the body aches, right? So anxiety does definitely produce body ache. So you may have these body aches in your arms, right? I had them in my biceps. You may have these in your back or in your legs, or you may even have these in your jaw because you're clenching your teeth down due to the anxiety. All these feelings are definitely similar to COVID, and they start to overlap, and uh, it further emphasizes the idea that I do have COVID. So you may find yourself going and getting tested every other week, right? You may produce or you may partake in some compulsive behavior such as seeing the doctor so on and so often, or you may find yourself checking your temperature every hour on the hour, right? Or taking medicine, or whatever it is, right? All these things are signs of anxiety. So for me, I noticed again that it was time for me to go to see a therapist when when I saw that my anxiety was taking over my social life. So was hanging out with friends and not being able to be present in the conversations. It was taking over my career. So being at work and not being able to focus on the task at hand, but also even in my academics. And this is where I said, man, I found myself getting grades that I typically don't get. All these things over a span of 6 months, give or take maybe a month or so, there were evidence that, hey, something's up and I need to go and take care of my mental health. So I wanted to kind of like briefly tell you guys a little bit about that story because I don't want people to continue to still think that therapy is for people who are, like, as they say, crazy. And we shouldn't even be saying that, to be honest. Therapy can be for anyone. It doesn't matter if you're going through a breakup, you're having test anxiety, low confidence, or on the bigger scales, you're suffering from schizophrenia, bipolar. Therapy truly is for everyone. And that's the whole idea with this podcast. I want to make sure that everyone knows that therapy can be beneficial and that everyone should take advantage of it. And also, right now, in addition to not only the schools giving out free therapy, but due to COVID, a lot of insurance companies are giving free sessions. So if you are interested in seeing a therapist, I would suggest going and calling your insurance company and asking them, like, hey, are my fees waived for therapy or for mental health services during this time due to the pandemic? A few that I've noticed that have been doing that is Aetna, United, and I want to say maybe Cigna. I'm not quite sure, but I know that these are a few places that are giving free therapy. So, also I wanted to again break the myth that therapy is expensive. In some instances, it can, but also I will say this, and I think I'm gonna end with this. Uh, Warren Buffett, he's a famous investor, and one thing that he's famous for saying is that price is what you pay, but value is what you get. And with therapy, is very similar. There's a price that you do pay, but the value that you get is so much more than the price that you pay, right? The value of learning how to control your anxieties, right? The value of having a successful marriage. These things are things that you can't necessarily put a price tag on. So if you have any questions, definitely reach out. Again, you can check out my podcast. The podcast is on Spotify, it's on Apple Podcasts, and many other platforms. My Instagram is the Players Coach LLC, and also my website for those that are looking for maybe a therapist down in the South Florida area. My website is www.theplayerscoach.net. So thank you guys, and again, my apologies for taking so long to do another episode, but due to COVID and everything else, things have really been backed up. So thank you, and if there's any topics or ideas that you want to talk about or you would like for me to talk about, definitely let me know. All right, guys. Peace.